The standard control scheme for older racing games is pretty simple. You accelerate with the primary face button, you brake with the button next to it, and whether or not you use the analog stick or the D-pad was purely preference. That makes sense, right? Yeah, so about that. That's not fully true for Crash Team Racing at a high level, and it's not actually something that many people know about, so let's talk about that. Crash Team Racing released in 1999, and was the final game of the Crash franchise that Naughty Dog developed. As a late PS1 game, it had a few extra considerations built into it. By now, the PS1 had a few different peripheral controllers for specific game genres, and the DualShock controller had already debuted with Ape Escape, so there was options around for how you wanted to play your games. Although CTR is perfectly playable with the standard digital controller, I mean, why not try using a steering wheel with a driving game, even though it's really meant for simulation games? Just never mind that. There's just kind of one problem with that. Common practice at the time for PS1 racing games was to map acceleration to X, which is a digital input. That means it doesn't care how much you hold the button down or how much force you put into it. As long as the console detects the input being made, you're going forward as if you're flooring it.
Okay, floor it!
The solution was pretty clear once you realized that the steering wheel is taking an analog input for steering already, and you have two analog sticks. So why don't we make accelerate an analog input? Now, I'll admit all of that is speculation on my part, since this is a super niche topic that only speedrunners like me really care about, but it makes a great deal of sense, and it ended up having some unintended consequences that we'd find out about later. Bizarrely enough, this analog acceleration ended up being used in the default control scheme of the game. The alternate input is in fact just in the manual. You can just see it right there. It is just hold up on the right stick and you go forward. I don't know who played CTR casually and actually decided to use this instead of using the X button, but I'm sure those people exist. Comment in the comments if you did that. Anyway, I digress. It is kind of wildly impractical to do this if you're just playing the game casually. Most people wouldn't be able to comfortably brake or hit the item button while they zoomed through the tracks. So for the vast majority of people who played CTR, let alone actually read in the manual, you just use the X button. You could easily roll your thumb to either side for the other essential controls, and it was just the obvious button to press if you played any other racing game on the PS1. Plus, since the DualShock was only partially supported across the PS1's library due to coming out after the console's launch, most people also use the D-pad for steering instead of the left stick. Analog controls on standard controllers were still pretty new, so people were largely more comfortable ignoring the sticks, or they just may not have had a DualShock. Anyway, let's circle back to those unintended consequences I mentioned. There's a technique that you might be familiar with if you ever tried to get good at either the original Crash Team Racing or Nitro Fueled. It's mostly the same across both games. The technique is known as U-turning, and it allows the player to take extremely sharp turns in midair by holding brake and down left or down right on the D-pad. In the original game, this comes at the cost of your boost reserves, so it's much more situational than in Nitro Fueled. The only time that you ideally want to U-turn in the original game is when there is no other way of taking a particular shortcut or line without killing your reserves. Despite the fact that it's not quite as ubiquitous, it is still an essential technique for CTR speedrunning and time trials, and things start getting a little bit strange if you happen to prefer the left stick for steering. The input for U-turning is impossible on left stick. If you try to U-turn with the left stick, you'll rotate your kart, but your momentum will keep going in the same direction you were originally going. This also happens on D-pad inputs if you try to U-turn while holding the X button, which is why I omitted that button when I explained it. This would obviously put you at a noticeable disadvantage in a speedrun or a time trial. And it does, if it wasn't for the fact that the right stick accelerate actually comes in to save the day here. On April 30th, 2020, a bit over 2 decades after CTR launched, French speedrunner Carly shared that you could use the right stick acceleration, hold square, and simply turn left and right with the left stick to U-turn like normal. Matter of fact, you don't even need to use the left analog stick. This also works without the down input on D-pad. Anyway, while putting in the brake input is a little bit awkward with this control method, it is consistently easier both in terms of difficulty and not being as painful on the left thumb during extended grinding sessions. There's a bit of a learning curve, I know. I had to go through it. It was really awkward relearning the game with the right analog stick as my acceleration method, but it was so worth it. But wait, it doesn't even end there. It turns out this method of U-turning has an additional benefit over the traditional method. There's another technique that involves holding brake, accelerate, and rapidly mashing the jump button over rough terrain that slows you down, like the grass shortcut on lap 1 of Tiger Temple. For some reason, this allows you to cut across without losing as much speed compared to if you just tried to froggy across without either inputs. By the way, the act of just mashing the jump button over and over again is called froggy. Just think of it like bunny hopping if you are familiar with other games that have that as a thing. But yeah, if you're holding brake and accelerate while you're froggying across rough terrain like that, for some reason you just kind of cut across without losing as much speed compared to if you just tried to froggy across without the other inputs. And if you do this technique while using the right stick instead of X for your acceleration, not only do you get to U-turn while doing it, you also lose speed at an even slower rate for some reason. I don't know why, but it's an advantage that does add up over the course of a run if you end up U-turning a lot to correct yourself. Look, I'll freely admit I'm making a bit of a bigger deal out of this than it really warrants. Like, again, U-turning is not optimal in a lot of places in CTR. There are only a few tracks where you really want to do this, and even that specific niche interaction with the off-road, you basically only do it on like 2 tracks. Like, I think it's just Tiger Temple and Dragon Mines where that's actually used and is optimal to do it, and I actually don't know if it's even optimal on Tiger Temple. But you also do that on Turbo Track with the right stick U-turn, and you lose a little bit less speed, so it is like a slight time save there as well. And it's just kind of, yeah, it's a weird little thing. If you combine this with steering with the left stick, you have so much more precision available with gentler turns on some tracks. I get a lot of use out of that on Blizzard Bluff. And it's pretty clear that future optimizations of the original CTR probably should use this control method because it's basically all upside, with the only downside being a bit of a steeper learning curve. And despite all this being known about for years, it's still not actually that widely used, well, because it just straight up wasn't documented anywhere but like a slightly old speedrun.com forum thread that barely anyone saw and was just kind of mentioned occasionally in the time trial Discord or in the speedrun Discord. So I very much wanted to get this information more out there with some relevant context because this is how I comfortably run the game without causing damage to my left thumb. Not only is the right stick a little bit broken in CTR by being optimal for these techniques, it's also a huge boon for accessibility for anyone like me who just can't run the game on D-pad or needs an alternative controller. It absolutely deserves to be known about, and I have to say I am very thankful that Naughty Dog just kind of randomly decided to actually assign this analog acceleration into the game, like on the default control scheme, because if they didn't, I wouldn't be able to play it like all these years later and actually try to push myself as far as possible. And I really hope that other people are going to be able to do it as a result of this video or like anything like that. So yeah, thanks for watching, I guess. I kind of meandered into my conclusion here, and I'm not really entirely sure if this is the style of video I'm going to be going for going forward, but like, niche speedrunning topics like this really interest me, and I like yapping about the games that I like, so I guess you're going to see more of that on this channel, maybe. Like the video, comment in the comments, do all that stuff that makes the YouTube algorithm go burr, because I do want this channel to like actually mean something, and I'll hopefully like have something else going on within a couple weeks. I don't know, I'll decide on something. Thanks for watching. Bye.